A running joke within the Ninjago community, or more importantly, a running fear within the Ninjago community, has always been the concept of the Overlord's return. It is something that has happened a fair few times over the course of the show, and it's definitely something that a lot of Ninjago fans don't want to see happen anymore. But he always comes back. He is always a character that will return in some sort of sense, and we've always had loose explanations as to how the Overlord does return over the course of the years. But the thing is that we've never really had concrete proof on the direct actions that are made that truly does allow his return. So I thought what we would do today is actually take a look at all of the instances of the Overlord's return, and try to quantify what actions within the course of Ninjago's history were the actual catalysts that allowed the Dark Lord to return, and more importantly, has anything actually happened since Crystallize that may potentially allow the Overlord to return once more. Now, depending on who you are, that is either bone chilling or really exciting, but regardless of all of that, let me take you through how the Overlord has returned each and every time. Just take a look through what could actually be happening in between all of these instances, and try to give a concrete answer on how he returns. So, let me not waste any more of your time, and let's get into it. Now, the first time we see the Overlord return is, of course, within Season 2. We get to see him during the Stone Army arc, where he does eventually go to Ninjago and attempt to become the ruler of the realm itself in his original dragon form. But the thing is that when we actually initially encounter him, he is just essentially a spirit orb, just something that just floats and doesn't seemingly has any direct sway amongst what happens in the physical world. But he is still somewhat manifested within this moment. But the thing is that it seems to be that the Overlord was always manifested in this moment, just simply down to the fact that he was never defeated by the first Spinjitzu Master to begin with. In the depiction of what we've been told of their encounter, the first Spinjitzu Master essentially split the island in two, just simply as a means to prevent the final battle, because there was no end in sight. So the Overlord has just essentially been lingering in this spiritual form for a very long time. But the thing is that in the 2D depictions, and actually what we see within Season 2, are two seemingly different things. The Overlord has more of a shadowy form, whereas he actually takes more of an energy-like form within Season 2 itself. So how does he go from that form to what we actually get to see in that season? And I think that mostly comes down to the impacts of Garmadon. Obviously, during this time, Garmadon gets bitten by the Devourer, he becomes evil, he becomes king of the underworld, he takes the golden weapons, and he ultimately, messes with them and they get sent off into space. Garmadon has done many things that by all accounts would give the Overlord power. The chaos and the shift in the balance is ultimately what gives him that strength, and Garmadon has been doing that by all accounts. Seemingly by his own plan, but that's a different discussion for a different day. But it seems to be that after the event of the actual Stone Warriors battle with the first Spinjitzu Master, Garmadon was the main reason why the Overlord was actually able to gain power. But in the end, Lloyd does destroy him with the golden form, but he does come back in the very next season. Now you may be wondering, is there actually a reason why that is actually the case, or a reason that links back to this video's topic? Well, not really. The thing is that he survives because of Borg. He doesn't necessarily get depowered in this moment, he just gets stopped. So it does seem to be that it's just a simple case of the Overlord just managed to survive in a very strange way. It is the only part of this video that isn't really in line with the rest of it. But even then, if you wanted to contribute the arguments that I've been saying, you could ultimately argue that all of the designs and all of the technological advancements that was made within the realm of Ninjago was contributing to the empowerment of the Overlord, because in reality all of these things were made to serve the Overlord's grand purpose. So they're all byproducts of darkness and destruction, so they could fit in by all accounts. But it does just seem to be that he just generally survived that one randomly through the digital space. But then come the defeat from Zane, he goes into dormancy for a fair bit of time, and this is one of the biggest stretches where he basically is gone. There is that instance in Decoded where a part of the Overlord is within Zane's functions, but that's not really the Overlord, at least not the Overlord that we're talking about in this moment. Let me know if you want a video on that version of him, because it's really weird. But the thing is that he is dormant for a fair bit of time, and the earliest canonical instance where he does appear within the show's timeline is after the events of Hunted, or more specifically Harumi's demise. In that moment, he is able to transport Harumi to this new space where he is actually an energy or ball-like object once more. So it seems to be that he was reactivated and he was able to do things once again. So what actions actually caused the Overlord to gain enough power to actually be able to do that within Season 9? Now the thing is that what needs to happen has to directly contribute to the powers and the side of darkness and destruction. So if we look at it in the most binary sense, Season 4, Chen is messing with the powers of creation, so it's not included there. Season 5, I guess you could maybe argue that transporting a realm into a different realm could contribute, but again, it seems to be that regardless of what the cursed realm is, it is still somewhat one of the realms of creation, so it is what it is, and it kind of just exists in its own sense. Skybound, by all account, never happened. Day of the Departed, you could actually argue was the beginning of it, but I don't think it would have been much of a contributing factor. And then Season 7, again, the powers of time are under the powers of creation. Which brings us to Season 8, and in my opinion, the main catalyst on how the Overlord was able to return. Yes, like I said, Day of the Departed did have some sort of a contributing factor in my opinion, and may have brought the Overlord back to some sort of really basic and primal form, but I believe that in Season 8, Garmadon's awakening of his true potential, which gave him access to his own powers, was really the cause of everything when it did come to the Overlord's return. I believe that Garmadon's increase in power and the upset of the balance because he took away Lloyd's power is the main reason the Overlord was actually able to set things in motion once more. That is a huge shift in the balance, a huge disruption, a huge aspect of the wrong side of the balance taken over, and definitely would contribute into how the Overlord would be able to return. I believe Garmadon was once again the catalyst, whether he realized it or not. And the thing is that it's not like Garmadon stops using his powers by any account. We do know that just generally speaking, things that happened around the land of Ninjago did contribute when it did come to the Overlord's return. A very common funny one would be the fact that graffiti was apparently an aspect of it. But yeah, but the thing is that I do believe that Garmadon was once again the main aspect as to why the Overlord could return, because it then ultimately does link back to one of the things that the Overlord did say within the last episodes of Crystallize, where he talks about how it was ultimately all his grand plan. Ultimately, all of it was just so he could find a vessel worthy of his return. So if he planned to deploy the Great Devourer on Garmadon from the beginning, it would make sense that the Overlord somehow foresaw Garmadon's ability to use destruction way later down the line, which would actually demonstrate a fairly comfortable way to demonstrate how the Overlord was able to return much quicker than Wu anticipated. I don't think Wu anticipated whatsoever his brother returning and utilizing his elemental powers in that sense. I don't think Wu could have anticipated something like that whatsoever, and would actually perfectly coincide with this idea that the Overlord was able to essentially defy destiny. I do think it's a fairly comfy way to just kind of explain how the Overlord was meant to come back, and I kind of wish the writers thought of this themselves. But again, once more, Overlord is defeated by Lloyd, and he is seemingly back dormant, and that kind of brings us through to present day. It makes me wonder, could the Overlord return soon? Not as Raz's master, luckily, but it does bring up just an interesting question as to whether or not there is enough darkness and destruction within the world to actually quantify such a return. And I do think it's a fairly debatable aspect, so let's go through it. Again, remember, we are quantifying a reason for the Overlord's return to be something that does involve darkness and destruction. So if we look at it through the content that we got, for example, Legends, Guy in Monstrosity doesn't upset the powers of destruction whatsoever. The Land of Monsters is just simply the Land of Monsters, so I feel like that is fairly safe to assume. Dragon's Rising Season 1 mainly involves obviously Beatrix and Imperium, but they are taking advantage of Source Dragon energy, which is derived from the side of creation, so that wouldn't have had any sort of impact whatsoever. Season 2, Part 1 more specifically, I mean, we do get to see the Blood Moon ritual, which does involve Theoraxian magic, which is known to be a dark type of magic and something that is known to be evil. So I would say that definitely does qualify as something that could contribute to an Overlord return. Darkness and destruction in the form of magic is no stranger whatsoever, which also retroactively means Klaus's magic would have also been a factor as to how the Overlord could return in Season 9. But anyway, that is the first thing that we did get to see. Season 2 Part 2, again, not really involving darkness and destruction whatsoever. It was mainly elemental power and source dragons, so again, derived from the powers of creation. Season 3 Part 1 involves Thunderfang. Now, Thunderfang actually utilizes chaos energy, and that's not distinctly defined as being something that does link back to darkness and destruction, so that is a debatable aspect. But what is not debatable is that Thunderfang, the main bulk of the souls that he has absorbed that allows him to use his power are Oni souls, which are derived from darkness and destruction. So it does mean that Thunderfang, by all accounts, is channeling some form of darkness and destruction regardless on how you feel about chaos energy. So he also would contribute to how an Overlord return could possibly take place at some point down the line. Which means Season 3 Part 2, I guess you could also maybe argue is the case, but we are mainly using soul energy in this moment. This again goes back to the debate on whether or not chaos is classified as something you'd fall under destruction. But the thing is that it seems to be chaos is its own source-like type power, so it really is difficult to quantify, but for the sake of argument, I'm gonna say no. And then lastly, we have got Season 4 Part 1. This is the most recent instance if Season 4 Part 2 has come out after the point that you're watching this video. But anyways, this season again is back to Beatrix and Imperium, but is using unbalanced source energy. Now, this is by all accounts still derived from the powers of creation and is byproducts of the powers of creation, but you could argue that unbalanced source energy could potentially lead into darkness and destruction. It is still something that could theoretically be used in a bad sense when it does come to the Overlord, but I do think for the sake of argument, by definition Source Dragon energy isn't derived from everything else that we've talked about, so I don't think it could contribute, and I do think that is definitely a better thing, depending on how you feel about the Overlord. But with all of those seasons now, marked off on whether or not they use the same thing, it comes to the ultimate conclusion on whether or not the Overlord could return soon. And unfortunately, it is a possibility. Darkness and destruction is something that has played a factor in some of Dragon's Rising seasons, and even a little bit of that does contribute to the Overlord. I do still think he's in a very spirit-like energy state, in similar vein to what we've seen in his original state in Crystallized and also in Season 2, but I do think there is the potential for him to continue to grow his power, especially with what Raz is up to. Anything is theoretically possible. I mean, I will say I don't think the Overlord is going to return in Dragon's Rising. That is, in my opinion, no chance whatsoever, especially after Crystallized. But I do think if my logic is sound and correct, the placement of how he could return are already in place, and it's fully potentially the case that the Overlord is back to being some form of conscious. But who knows, and who knows if we'll ever see him again. But as it stands by the logic set out, it's possible that he could return. But that is how he did return in all of his other instances, and how he could return within the future. And I would like to know, what do you think of this logic? What do you think of my examples? Do you think it makes sense that Garmadon played a very pivotal part in more than one of his returns? I would love to know what you think, because I do think it's fairly interesting. And of course, do you want the Overlord to return? I honestly see the argument for both sides, but I just don't really want him back anytime soon, because we do get some really cool villains, and I would rather see stuff like that happen instead of an Overlord return. But I'd love to know what you think, because I do think it is fairly fascinating. But besides that, thank you very much for watching the video, and I do hope you enjoyed. And if you did, please consider subscribing. I love discussing Ninjago with more people. And if you do want to support the channel any further, which you do not have to, you could always become a channel member and join the legends that you see on screen. Each of your support means the absolute world to me, and I truly cannot thank you enough. But like I said, that's about it for today, and take care. Okay,